Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. For us leather crafters, any day is a good day to make a new belt. I've got plenty of belts, not the point. The journey, that's what we're looking for. But in this video, we're going to concentrate on two things. Well, first off, let's go with a high quality belt blank. That's going to make all the difference in the world in the outcome of our work. But secondly, let's go with a very cool stamp design that's going to use a combination of stamps. This is going to be a beautiful belt. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there, going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's step over to our pattern table, get started. We're not going to go to a digital pick for this pattern because really all we're making here is a simple template that'll help us lay in our stamp design. But one big point, we've got a lot of videos on making and sizing belts. We're not going to go into all that, but just a quick crash course here. This is called a shorty, not an industry term. It's just what I've always called them. But right there, that's our waist size. Let's add 10 inches to that and we'll get our belt blank. Well, all that 10 inches is the distance from here out added to the distance from here out. Now that can vary depending on the spread and the amount of holes we want to add. But also right here, I'm going to go 3 inches from the last hole because we're going to drop in a belt tip on that. This is going to be a good looking belt. Now, the stamp pattern we're going to go with, we've seen this, one of my favorites. We're going to change this up a little bit. We're going to spread these basket weave stamps out a little. Then we're going to drop in a spot in between each. Again, this is going to look nice. Well, our pattern here is simply boxes, 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch, and then we've got a spread of 1/2 inch on those. Now, with this design, we could lay in an anchor line or a guideline, and we can work out from there. But when we spread those out, if we lay a line in, we're actually going to be able to see it. But on this little template, all we have to do is mark one side. We'll drop in our basket weave and work out from there. Everything's going to fall into place. But also, one more thing I want to do here. We're going to change up the types of stamps we're going to use because there's our buckle. We've got a nice buckle set. We'll talk more about that. But notice the lines in that. How about we pick some stamps that have very similar lines? All right, looking forward to this. Let's step over to our main table and start marking our belt blank. We're going to go with a Herman Oak belt blank, and here's why. Herman Oak is a top shelf tannage. They've been doing this for 150 years. They know what they're doing. But this leather is actually going to make our projects look better without any increase in our skill level. Now, one big downside for us crafters, a side of Herman Oak, that can be expensive. We don't have to buy a side. We sell this both in belt blanks and panels. So if we got a project that we're going to stamp or we're going to carve, or we're going to put a lot of time into, this is absolutely the way to go. So let's start by cutting our blank. Now it's hard to get all of this in the shot, but using our shorty here, all I've got to do is take my waist size, 35, and I'm going to add 10 inches to that. So that gives us a 45-inch blank. So let's start here. Now, what I'd like to do, again, Herman Oak, high quality, but nonetheless, I would still like to trim off just that end. So we know we're into good leather here. Then down on this end, I'm going to trim it 45 inches right there. Good. Okay. So on this, let's butt to one end. I'm going to mark for my rivet holes. And now, let's scoot to the other end and mark for our size holes. Good, we've got that marked. Now we know where our stamp pattern's going to land. Let's go ahead and punch our holes. Now, for our rivet holes down on our buckle, I'm going to go with about the second, third, maybe even the fourth hole because I want our rivets to be a little bit snug in the hole. Good. Now down on this end, let's go ahead and go up to either the largest tube or maybe the second from the largest. And let's punch our size holes. We've got that. Okay, let's reset here. We're going to case our leather. One big point here, we don't have to case our leather. We can simply wet it, give it about 15 minutes, and then we can stamp. But we're using a quality piece of leather. So let's give this every opportunity to get the best stamp impression we can. So our first step when we're casing, we're going to wet our leather. let's take our leather, run this through our water. Now, we could simply let this sit, but I don't want to get too much water in my leather. That's not really an issue because we're going to let this air dry just a little bit. Let that water wick in, but let that excess water evaporate out. Good. Okay, let's make one more pass just a little bit faster. And we've got that. Okay, we've got a good bit of water in this. So now I'm just going to let this sit here. I'm going to give it about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And again, let some of that excess water evaporate out. I've given this about 35, maybe 40 minutes. That excess water has evaporated off, but I can feel it. It's got a good moisture content. So now let's roll this up and put this in a baggie. I'm going to seal that, and now let's give that anywhere from 3 hours to 96 hours. We've given our belt ample time to case, overnight in fact. Now when we case our leather, it takes a little planning ahead, but absolutely worth it. Notice how very consistent the moisture content is here. That's one of the things we're looking for. But secondly, the longer it cases, the softer the fibers in the leather will become. Now I mentioned 96 hours. That's a long time. We can leave it in there, but the problem is we're going to start to develop some mold. An easy way to combat that is let's just drop a little bit of dish soap or maybe mouthwash in our casing water. We'll be fine. All right, so let's leave that right where it is. Give that about 45 minutes because what we want to do is let this start to return to its original color. I've actually given our belt about 2, maybe 2.5 hours dry time. Very humid here today, but I can feel the body coming back. I can definitely feel some moisture, but it's starting to return to its natural or original color, okay? So on our design, we could always start this just inside of our last size hole and just work our way down. But we have a 1-inch spread here, 1-inch spread here. So how about we bring that design down across our size holes. Now we've got a 1.5-inch belt tip coming in. So I'd like to stop this just outside of this last size hole, okay? This might be confusing, but it's going to make sense. So right here, we're going to add spots in between each of our boxes or each of our basket weaves. So what I'd like to do is center that over our holes. And then our basket weave will fall in between. And on this, let's just go one more basket weave beyond this last hole. So I'm going to lay that in. And all I have to do is just mark one side. Good. And that is a great little awl. It gives us a very accurate line, okay? So now, let's start there, line up on that last box, and work our way down. And let's just stop our design just short of that inside rivet hole. Well, that's easy enough. We can always use a simple little template when we can't use a guide or an anchor line. All right, let's go put a stamp design in this belt. We're going to use 4 different stamp tools to create this design, but the good news there, 3 of these are common tools. Might have these in our shop already, but I'll drop in insets so we know exactly what tool does what. Now, these all have one thing in common. They all have similar lines to our belt buckle. That's our Sedona belt buckle set. 1.5 inch, we've got our buckle, our keeper, and our tip, and to me, a very classic look. All right, so let's start with our basket weave. Now, right here, I'm just going to do my best to sink the inside edge of my basket weave right on our marked line. Very good. Very crisp, very clean stamp. That's what we're looking for. That's the outcome from casing our leather. So let's do a second one. And I'm centering on that line, but more so between these holes. And one more. Oh, those look good. Very nice, clean stamp. So now I'm just going to work my way all the way down the belt. And one more. Well, that is beautiful. Again, we can see every detail in that stamp head. That's what we're looking for. Now we've cased the leather, absolutely. But we're also using a quality piece of leather. So let's do this. Let's flip this around. Now we're going to go with what's called a meander stamp. Back there we go. This has, again, similar lines to our Sedona buckle. And I'm going to drop this on top and below of each basket weave. So let's do this. I'm going to center as best I can. Good, okay. Now I'll go all the way down one side and back the other, but let's do this just so we can see what we're doing. Yeah, there we go. And I'll do that all the way down both sides. Okay, we've got that much. Now, is my stamping absolutely perfect? It is absolutely not, but the sign of handmade. Now, one good point, we can re-wet our leather if we need to. We just want to keep that to a minimum because every time we wet this, our impression is going to back out just a bit. All right, so next up, we're going to go with a small veiner, and all I'm going to do is bridge between the two meander stamps. Yeah, let's see, there we go. I'm fighting with that because here we can see it, but over here I can see it. So, all right, let's just butt that right there. We're just spanning the two. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to do the same thing all the way down this side and all the way back on the other side. Okay, there we go. Next up, let's go with a larger veiner. And again, we're going to do exactly the same thing, but now we're going to span just a little further out. And there we go. We've got a very nice, clean stamp design. Couple of things I like about it. Well, first off, it's almost got the feel of a chain. But secondly, our end just simply comes down to a point. And it's a little more open. It's not so packed with stamp designs, the eye can't see what's going on there. Very nice. All right, so I'm going to leave this on our main cutting table. We've got to give this ample dry time. I would say at least 24 hours. So let's do that. Then we'll pick it up and finish this beautiful belt out. Our blank is dry and that looks good. Now, great thing about the Herman Oak blanks, they're edged, front and back. So all we have to do is add a groove. Now we could go punch our rounded punch and our English punch, then groove. But if we're not comfortable or confident going around that rounding with our groover, no groove looks better than a bad groove. But also here, let's get a good groove in that edge because we're going to use an antique and we want that to pick that up. Now on my groover, I typically go at 1/8 of an inch. But on this, we're about 5/16 of an inch between the edge and the outside of our design. So I'm going to bump that up just a little bit over 1/8 of an inch, get that to sit right between the two. So let's groove. And there we are, hard to get a close-up of a belt and get all the belt in the shot, but there we go. Okay, looking good. Let's go drop in our punches. Let's start on this end. We're going to go with a 1.5 inch round end punch. Now, not totally necessary, but if we've got the tool, makes a nice touch. We've got that, okay. Next up, rule in leather, 1.5 inch oblong, 1.5 inch strap. Let's drop this in. Good, we've got that. Now, on this end, we would typically go with an English punch, but we're going to drop in a belt tip. Nice. Now, if we don't have a 1 1/4 inch end punch, what we can do is drop this on our belt with our awl, butt that to the end, and let's mark that. Mark where we need to stop cutting, pull that off, and we just need to cut inside of that line just because we've got a little metal there. But if we've got a 1 1/4 inch punch, let's drop this in. Good. Okay, let's go back over to our main table, trim that off. Let's trim this down. So let's take our tip, and I'm going to set this just off the end of the leather, just in case we've got more metal down there than on the edges. So let's, with our awl, just mark 2 spots. That's all we need. All right, let's cut from those 2 spots to the end of our cut there, but let's do our best to keep that as parallel as we can. Good. Okay. Now up here, let's come in and just cut that at an angle. There we go. That'll slide easily through the keeper. And that fits right on. Very nice. Okay, let's reset here. Add some dye. We're going to go with our Pro dye. It's the only dye I use. We can't miss with this. And let's use our light brown, my favorite color, because we're going to come in with an antique. That's going to sink down in our stamp design, help that stand out, but it's also going to sink in our groove line and will hit our edges. But it's also going to bring that brown down just a little bit. Now, for the folks that are new, just a couple of easy points. Well, right here, cheap plastic trash bags, that's going to protect my work surface. But if we dye on that, it becomes an absolute mess. So let's drop some paper on top of that. Anything will work, but this is the shipping paper. If you order a piece of leather from us, it's going to come wrapped in this. And sometimes I'm almost as happy to see this as I am the leather. Now we're going to dip dye. Super easy way to get a very clean, very consistent dye across our project. But also, we're not going to have dye on anything but our belt and our paper. So right here, I've got just a hook made out of cheap wire from any hardware store. Let's hook that through, and let's draw this through our dye rather slowly. And there we are. Let some of the excess drain off. Good. Okay. Let's lay this out, and I'm going to give that about 2 hours dry time. We've had plenty of dry time here. In fact, it's a rather dry day now, so that was about 90 minutes. But notice how consistent our dye is and how easy is that. But at the same time, notice the flexibility of the belt after we dye it. It's almost just like it was before we dyed it. I've used a number of dyes that make our belt so stiff. Bigger problem there, right here, when we do a bend back, that leather snaps or cracks. Worst thing that could happen on a belt. All right, so we're going to add an antique. We're going to go with our medium brown. We're going to bring this color down just a little bit, but it's really going to sink into our stamp design. But before we do this, let's flip this over. I'm going to add some painter's tape, because to me, there's nothing more unprofessional than antique wrapping around the back of a belt. That looks terrible, but some simple tape will take care of that. Now, let's go right up. Back here we go. We've got a bevel right there. So let's go right up to the inside of that bevel. So when we add our antique, it's going to go all the way around, but we'll have a good clean line across that. Now on our punches, we didn't actually bevel around that. So let's just trim that tape off there. But let's go all the way down both sides. And we've got tape all the way down on both sides. So now let's just trim where we need to. And that's all we need. Dyeing our leather, almost no mess at all. The antique is a whole different story. This is the last stop in my shop for a pair of gloves and some paper. But we're going to add our antique 2 different ways. First off, we're going to come across with a rag. We're going to cover the top grain. Then we'll come back and fill in with our dauber. But because we come across the top grain first, that's not going to get any darker. We'll hit our groove line and our edges. This is going to look good. Now, gloves, absolutely. This is also the last stop in my shop for a rag. In fact, I've got a small box of rags that can't be used anywhere else. Well, they can certainly be used for our antique. So let's get some out. Drop that on just some of our pattern sheeting. Good, okay. Now, with our rag, let's add this to our top grain. In fact, I tell you what, I'm going to start on this end and work my way left, because let's add, and then let's wipe back across where we've been. Good, we've got that. Now let's come back in with our dauber and let's work our antique down into our stamp designs, but also down into our groove line. And there we go. We've gone all the way to the end. Now what I'd like to do is punch my size holes after we add antique, because that can get down in that hole, but we can just clean that out. But also too, don't hesitate to come back anywhere we might need a little extra antique, because again, the top grain is already to the color that it's going to stay. So we can keep adding if we need to. And there we go. Notice too, it's sunk down in that groove line. That looks good. Now it's going to lighten a little bit as it dries. But also, if it's a little inconsistent, that too should go away as it dries. In fact, down here, I need just a little bit more in that groove line. Okay, that looks good. Now let's come over and do our edges. And now that that's on, let's come back across the top. If we can find a clean piece of rag. There we go. Let's just come across. Very nice. Okay, let's give this about, I would say maybe 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to go with a top coat, but we need to do two things first. Well, first off, we need to remove our tape. But secondly, I've got antique down in each of these size holes, so let's just take a piece of lace, a little bit thicker lace, and let's just clean that out. And there we go. Whatever's left in there will certainly dry out. All right, let's flip this over, take off our tape. And there we go. Nice. In fact, notice we've got a good, clean, straight line on our antique and none wrapping around. Okay, so let's go with my all-time favorite, Leather Balm. It's a great top coat. It's going to enrich our dye color, and it's going to give us a little bit of gloss, not too much. But right there, that is beautiful. I almost don't want to put a top coat on that. Quality leather and a quality dye. All right, so with our Leather Balm, we're going to add this. First off with a piece of fleece, and I like fleece because it's going to hold a lot of the top coat. We'll let that dry just a couple of minutes. Then we're going to come back in with a soft cotton rag and we'll buff this out. So let's start there we go, a little bit sparingly. Let's just work our way down, because the one thing we don't want here is streaks or bubbles. Those will definitely stand out. Okay, let's give that just a couple of minutes. Let that wick in and dry. And just about 5 minutes at most. So now let's take our cotton rag, and I'm just going to buff this. And that looks good. Very nice, beautiful color. Now it's going to lighten a little bit as it dries. But next up, let's go over to our edges. So let's get our edges, same way, a little bit sparingly. I'm going to put some on, then I'm going to come back, wipe that off, then we'll come back with our burnisher. Okay, now with our burnisher, let's slick, but the point here, not pressure, more heat and friction. But let's just easily slide that back and forth. Now we're starting to get a nice rounded edge on that. And down to our end. All right, let's come back with our cotton rag. Now let's hit that again, and that's just going to add the final touch to that. And there we are. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but we've got a little bit of a gloss. It's nice, smooth, feels good to the touch. Okay, all we have to do now, add some spots in our hardware, and we're done. So let's go over to our pattern table, drop in some spots. The more I look, the more I see little misses where I didn't get that antique all the way down in the stamp impression. Nobody's going to see that. And in fact, once we get this assembled, we won't even see that. All right, so first off, the best way to set just about everything we sell, the Little Wonder. That's a great tool. It's a good tool to have in our shop. But if we don't have one, we can always set spots by hand. And in fact, the spots, one of my favorite decorations because they're inexpensive, they're easy to add, and they look good. And we've got all kinds of shapes and sizes and finishes. So to match our buckle, let's go with a nice polished nickel. Now to set these, 5 steps, setting these by hand, 5 steps. First off, we need our art knife. Now when we get this, it's going to come with a much smaller, more sturdy blade. But we also sell the longer blade. That's what we're going to use to set our spots. So 5 steps here. Let's take a spot. Now right inside of our stamp design, we can mark that if we need to, but it's relatively easy. Let's take a spot. I'm going to press that in right in the middle, okay? I think the camera can see that. Now we've got our 2 marks for our tines. What we're going to do with this art knife is we're going to try to mimic the shape of those tines. So from this side, let's push through. This is just a little pallet made of cardboard because we're pushing through the belt. We don't want to ding our blade. Same on this side. Okay. Now let's flip that blade around and open that hole up just a little bit more. One thing I don't want is more slit than spot to where we could actually see the slit. But let's force the tines down in that. Push that through. Very nice. That's going to look good with that buckle. All right. Next step, let's flip this over, press that down, get those tines through the belt. Let's be careful, we got an open blade there. But now let's just bend those tines in, okay? And the last step, let's put this on our marble. I don't want to hit this hard enough to ding it or ding my leather. But what that's going to do, now I can't even feel those spots. They've curved in, not going to snag on anything. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing down the belt. Down here, I'm going to stop before we get to our last size hole. But this is going to, sounds like it's going to be a little tedious. Actually, it's not. If we do this, if we just mark all the way down, slit all the way down, it actually goes relatively quickly. And our spots are set. That's a good looking belt. Now, one good point. When I turn the camera off, I don't jump over to my Little Wonder and set the balance of the spots. If we start setting these by hand, I'm going to set them by hand. But look at that. Notice how clean and straight our spots are, done by hand. That's a beautiful belt. All right, let's knock in a buckle, a keeper, and a tip. We're done here. Let's start with our keeper because this is so easy to forget. So let's slide this on right between those 2 holes. Good. And let's add our buckle. Good, we've got that. Now let's go with a medium double cap rivet. Technically the 5/16 inch. And let's bring that over to our edge so we can let that loop hang off. We get a good straight set. Make sure we've got the concaved end down. Good, we've got that. And let's come in right here behind our buckle. And we've got that. Boy, that looks good. Okay. On this end, we're going to set our tip. Now with this, typically, we've got 2 small set screws. Yeah, you can barely see those. Let's don't sneeze or those will disappear. We'll never see them again. But what I'd like to do, I want to add just a little bit of glue down at the tip. And that's just a little extra help there. Good. Okay. Now let's spread that out because as I push the keeper on, I don't want that glue to push up. So let's bring her a little down to our edges. Good, okay. Now let's slide the tip on. Boy, that's a good fit, okay. And let's flip this over. Now, on our little set screws, the best thing we can do here is just get one of the small eyeglass repair kits. That's got all kinds of little screwdrivers in it. So let's do our best to get that little. These are actually pointed. I don't know if we can see that, but there's a small point. Let's push that down in there. These can be a little trying. Absolutely. Good. Let's force that up and see if we can get that to screw down for us. And there we go. I can feel that pressing in on that leather. So let's just screw that down, good, to a point where we can't feel it, all right? Same thing on the second one. And these can be a little frustrating, but once we get it started, there we go, good and tight, very nice. Now, one good point here. Good, can't feel it, that's what we want. We don't want that sticking up because that's going to scratch the belt every time it goes through. But if they don't go all the way down, we can always take just a little sandpaper. They're brass, they're small, that will sand easily. But a good point here, quality buckle. We've got 2 tip screws. With a cheaper buckle, they're only going to have 1. That means it can move around on us too. Going to hold it right where it is. This looks good. Let's get a better look at it. I am as happy as I can be with that. That's a beautiful color. I love the antiques. But the bigger point here, we went with a quality belt blank. We've used a quality die, tools, hardware. You know, with that, we just can't miss. But we have got a beautiful, handmade, solid leather belt. I have a new belt. Nice. And I hope shortly you have a new belt too that you love making, love wearing, and I bet you're going to get some compliments on it. Good luck with your project.